Hello and welcome to today's show of Created to Write. Today I have with me Ruth. How are you today, Ruth?
I'm really well, thank you, Michelle. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, what is your pen name? Is it your full name or
Yeah, Ruth Embery. That's
Ruth Embery?
yeah.
So tell me, what made you first want to write?
That's a funny question in that if I'm bluntly honest, I it was a bit of a second prize. I wanted to speak, but I got the opportunity to write. But as I unpacked that and started doing that, um, I realized it had always been there in me. I'd always enjoyed words, even as a child. I was fascinated by words and unpacking words. And I come from a very heavy math science background. Two older brothers, my dad were all into math science, and that was valued in my home, not the language stuff. But I've realized as I got older that I'm a language person. I love language and yeah, that sort of stuff. So yeah, that sort of began a journey. I ended up for 3 years writing a short piece, which is kind of like a blog, really, three to 500 words every week for my church. And I still get encouraged by people some 15 years later. I've still got those things you wrote. That used to be the highlight of my week. So it was a very encouraging time. And I think it was when that ended someone said to me, "Oh, you should write," because they're going, "What are you going to do? You're not writing any, you're not doing this anymore. What are you going to do?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, and I did start. I thought blogging was it, and a friend said you should write a book, and I'm going, a book? That's a lot of words. I don't think I've got a book in me, you know." And anyway, that's another funny story because I still remember, you remember those moments, they sort of stick in your head. And I was at a local shopping mall and I was in the toilet and God dropped in the chapter titles to me of
Wow.
my first book. And yeah, it took me a long time because I think because probably insecurity and uncertainty about, would anybody read it or how do I go down this path? But yeah, that started the journey into writing a book. Um,
Yeah, the
yeah.
fears of most authors.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah. Um,
Yeah, so what does your writing routine look like?
yeah, there isn't really a huge routine for me. I remember reading something on our group where I met you on Facebook, and somebody said, "Are you a planner or a plotter or something or a pantser?" And I'm like, "Yeah, definitely pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants." Um, and I was talking to someone actually yesterday about, we do what our priorities are. And for me, that's one of the things that I probably struggle with, which is a different question. But when you don't have an external deadline someone else is setting for you, it's very easy to allow other things to come in and take over that sort of stuff. So that said, when I set myself a deadline that is external, I will sit down and do a lot of writing and, spend days doing it. Other times I go, "Oh, I'm going to set aside Thursdays as my writing day." And inevitably something happens, or, you know, um, somebody needs ministry, or somebody wants to catch up with coffee, and that gets so there's not a schedule as such. I'd like to do more of that, and that's one of my tensions that's continual of uh, do I value what I'm doing, and do I treat this like a real job or just a part-time hobby? And
That's so true. Hey, we put in what's most important to us into our schedule first, and
yeah,
everything else falls in around it. And sometimes writing isn't as important as
yeah,
other things like hanging out with friends.
yeah, yeah. And relationships are important. You can't,
Absolutely.
yeah, live without
Yeah,
it.
and so you're self-published.
Yes, yes.
What's the hardest part about that?
Well, again, those deadline things, you're setting the deadlines.
Mm.
My last book, I set the deadline because I published two at the same time, and I set the deadline by having a book launch date. And It actually was okay. It was a very different process in that that book, it's only short, it's only about 80, 90 pages. But it took me 2 weeks really to write. Not what I'd encourage people to do to themselves, but it just shows when you put those deadlines in, things can happen. And
Yeah.
yeah, so there's that side of it. I don't have, that's one of my struggles is writing a book is a financial investment.
Hmm.
I've always been good with the sort of editing stuff. I look back and I was one of those horrible people in classes, even as a young adult. If you hand out a handout back in the days when you got handouts, and I would pick the mistakes in it in like less than a minute. Spelling mistake here. You missed a comma. Wrong word. And I've had to tone that down, but you know, I have that ability to pick that stuff up, but you still don't with yourself. So who do you get to help you with editing without it costing you thousands of dollars? All of those sorts of things. I've got a husband who is a has a graphic design background, which has been great. So I've actually done my own covers as well and had a lot of fun with that and
Hmm.
realized I enjoy that sort of thing too. So yeah, that's it's an interesting journey. You've got to go with what you've got, the gifts and abilities that you've got, and I guess I'm fortunate in that sense that I can do that. Some people might say it needs a good cleanup. I don't know. I read a lot of stuff that's published by major publishers and people who are getting paid a lot of money for their books and have been edited by however many people, and you find terrible mistakes in them constantly. And I think, oh, well, my little ones are not so bad then. I don't know. Have I gone off the question? Uh,
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
yeah.
So tell me about your publishing house and how that came about.
Well, that was interesting because when I wrote my second book, which is called Truth, Exploring Truth in a Post-Truth World. Um, and I was just reading a few blogs and I was looking at because I did my first one through KDR. KDR, is it? The Kindle one? I don't know.
KDP?
KDP, yeah. Um, and I really was struggling because I went to order some more books and they was only publishing in America, like printing in America there. So you had to print your books in America and then get them shipped out. And they were going to ship for my author copies, they were going to charge me shipping on each book as an individual book. It was like $500. I'm like, what the? And so I in the Facebook group, I was looking at stuff, and people got me onto Ingram Spark, and they were in Melbourne. They locally print, and I thought, well, this is much better, and I have a lot more control. So I was looking into all of that and reading some blogs, and somebody had talked about a blog about they did their own publishing house because it made you look a bit more professional. You actually have a publishing house. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. And, you might actually find other people who are interested in that. And that took me down a whole path of I just went, I like that idea. And what would I do with that? And so I had a lot of brainstorming with my husband about that. And the name just popped into my head, Voice in the Dark. And I thought, oh, I like that. It's kind of, what are we doing here? We want to I'm very much about kingdom. So, the whole Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. So what does that look like for us? Well, that part of that Jesus says you're the light and the salt. So that kind of hit in there. There's a verse that says a voice crying in the wilderness, but I had that kind of the voice in the dark thing. And then I thought, well, stories are so powerful and important. Everyone has a story. And that story, especially the story of what God's done in our lives and how He's transformed us, has so much power. And I go back to years ago having conversations with my dad, and he had some interesting ideas about the world. And he'd sort of want to have these arguments with you. And it just came out of my mouth one day was, I feel like every time I come here, you're trying to encourage me not to be a Christian. And I said, but I've had an experience of God that you can't I can't shift that. You're never going to take that away from me. I've had an encounter. And that stopped him from having those arguments because you can't argue with someone's story and someone's experience. And so I just had this idea of, well, how do I help people to share their story. So I've had a few conversations with people who want to do books. We haven't got to a book yet, but I've got another part of that which is like blog size stories of what God's done in people's lives, and so that's for people who are books way out there. And I've got a few of them sort of. It's keeping up with people to say, come on, bring it in. But yeah, so that's just kind of growing out of there of using that as a tagline for events and things as well. So
Mm, sounds
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what the highlight of your author career has been so far.
There's a few little ones, I think, and they're unusual in a lot of ways. When I wrote my first book, I had a letter from someone in South Africa who I didn't know, who bought my
Mm.
book and read it and wrote a beautiful like review that I since have used. But yeah, that was pretty cool because you're sitting there going, okay, now I've reached out past my own circle of people who know me. Um, yeah, and even with the last ones, the last two, I've had a couple of sales in the UK and Germany of unknown people. Um,
Congratulations.
so yeah, I'm not selling by hundreds and thousands, but those little things you go, well, it's going outside past our circle, then
And what if it's for the one?
exactly, exactly.
Mm.
And that's one of those tensions again as an author. You spend so much time on these things, putting them out there, and you go, I want to see them get further than
Yeah.
just a few people. But yeah, we don't know the impact that has. It's the ripple effect, isn't
Ripple
it?
effect. Absolutely. I agree. I agree. So looking forward, what are you most excited about in the future?
I come back to our input in Uganda. Yeah, I
We
suppose
chatted
Tuesday.
to, we chatted about that before I started
Yeah,
recording.
I'm sort of going, okay, do I go there? Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing is we have a connection in Uganda. We have a couple, and we've had a passion for uh, other nations for a long time. Just there's been opportunities where we've been invited to use my husband and I, we've been invited to use our skills and abilities in other countries. And one of them, he's got an architectural background, so we've been involved in a school in Indonesia, which has a whole backstory to that too, how that came about. But I ended up doing a couple of weeks as a teacher over there. But yeah, in Uganda, having had the privilege last year to go and do some inner healing training with them, which is part of my passion. And so looking forward to going back and doing some train the trainer work over there. But yeah, that's part of that is my next book, as I said, of looking at how as Christians that we all know about body health and care about body health, but we're catching up with the rest of the world of realizing what's going on in our inner world is just as important, if not as more important than our bodily health. And how do we live in a space that has that health, not waiting until we hit trauma or we hit breakdown or depression or whatever, but there are tools out there and they're not new things. A lot of these are things that have been around for hundreds of years, if not more, that they're resurfacing, and skills and abilities of just how we connect with God and bring his reality into our space and see our lives through his reality instead of our circumstances and our past. And
Yeah.
I love that. That excites me beyond measure, is seeing people set free from a lot of lies and pain of the past, and being able to walk taller and freer. It's great.
Love that. Love that. Thank you for joining me here today, Ruth. If you haven't hit that like and subscribe button, now is a really good time to do it, and go and follow Ruth on socials or whatever links I'm going to drop below for you to follow her on, and find her books because I'm sure they are wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading a couple of them soon. Um, so, parting words of wisdom. What would you like to say to the person who hasn't started writing yet, or who has started writing and stopped?
Yeah. I think it comes back to what lots of people say, just write stuff. If you want to write and you never put pen to paper, you will never write. So you have to start something. Maybe you start with your shopping list. But no, seriously, like for me, a lot of it came out of journaling and just starting in that space of writing down what am I thinking today? What am I feeling today? What is God saying to me today? And get used to writing for no one in a space that's safe, because that's one of the big things that stops us. Like we all know that when I'm not feeling safe, when I'm feeling vulnerable, I don't want to put it onto paper. But yeah, if you've got a story to share and you want encouragement, I'm there behind you, and I'm sure lots of other writers will do that too. But finding someone to champion you in that place and set you some deadlines. To come back to that of you need to have this done by now. Yeah, just go for it. You've got nothing to
Wonderful.
lose.
Absolutely. Nothing to lose.
Yeah,
So true. Well, thank you for joining me. And everybody who's still watching, remember you were created to create, and perhaps you were created to write.
thanks,
Thanks,
Michelle.
Ruth.
Okay, bye.